my family, my life, and I appreciate you.
Next cup that bag. You know, like I said, I always try to express my appreciation, to everybody. It's a lot of people that have
perspective. Real empowerment, you better be respected. Lady fresh on that motherfucking check-in. Breezy got her back, she stay protected. This the fresh perspective. Real empowerment, you better be respected. This for the dreamers, it's to get you through the night, fam. Not for the haters, bet you they don't come outside.
Lady Fresh Brown, and that's just kind of started from there. Now, for the month of April, we are talking about autism. Just like all the other specials, we can't cover everything in one episode. So we decided we're going to break this down into 3 parts, and we still can't cover everything. But we're going to do our best to get as much information out to you guys as possible. So today we're going to be talking to Jen Slaton. She is a licensed clinical social worker, counselor, and psychotherapist based in California. And she's going to be coming to give us the doctor's perspective. So the doctor that you sit down with, and that can get the diagnosis for you, she's going to give us that information that we need to kind of aid us, understand autism, understand what it is, what it's not, some of the misconceptions, as well as try to educate us on what to look for and the steps that we may find necessary to take in order to help us in our journey for our child, and even some of the autistic adults in our life. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started, y'all. I want you guys to welcome Miss Jen Slaton to the show.
Am I on?
You are on. Hi, Jen. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do the show. You have no idea how important this really is to me. So you and I have had some great conversations leading up to today. And so I just want to thank you on behalf of my viewers for even agreeing to come and do the show today.
Oh, my pleasure. I love to, I get a little nervous, but I love to spread information and help people out because it's just so important that we all understand our own neurology. And
absolutely.
And I do have to clarify, I'm not a doctor. So I have a master's level. I'm a master's level therapist. So I just wanted to not misrepresent myself.
Got you. I got you. But you are able to diagnose.
Yes.
Autism. Yes, all right, so let's go ahead and dive right into it. So first, tell us a little bit about yourself. We know you're out of California and that you are able to diagnose autism. So tell us a little bit about how you got specifically into being an autism specialist.
Well, very young, I was very interested in just helping people that are different types of learners. And so I started out wanting to go in special education, and then I thought, that's not my personality. That's not for me. So I just kind of I volunteered for a Saturday program for autistic children, and I just fell in love with the kids. And just from there, I started working in the field, and I had this particular job where I went into the family homes of people that mostly had autistic children, but kids with special needs. And so for about 20 years, I worked hands-on with families to help them with parenting issues and challenging behaviors. And I just loved that job so much because I was really able to make an impact for the whole family. And that experience, that kind of hands-on, what works, what doesn't work, what supports the child, what supports the family, that was just invaluable. And then I got interested in doing therapy. And so I became a licensed therapist. And so I do work with a variety of not just autism, but I get a lot of autistic families, parents, couples. So it has become my specialty because I'm just so familiar with it. And I love autistic people. So
That's awesome. So can you tell us the actual definition of autism?
Well, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, but kind of the current thinking is that it's not really a disorder, it's a difference. But we go by this medical model in the United States that says just like any medical issue, you have to meet certain criteria to get that diagnosis. So it's hard. It's a difference in the way we socialize. So what we call neurotypical brain versus an autistic brain. They socialize differently. They understand social interactions differently. And when a child is growing up, that's something that can be very apparent in some autistic children, is that they don't really show an interest in peers, or they may be interested in peers, but they don't really know how to interact. So their brains just grow in a different way as far as just being social and interacting socially. And then there's often a communication difference. There's some types of autism. It used to be called Asperger's, which is not used anymore. Those kids come out very verbal very early. And they're often referred to as little adults because they have sophisticated language. But more common, I would say, is that there's a delay in language. And
Okay.
so parent could notice that their child just not picking up as much speech. And that overlaps into the social arena because communication is also social. And then the other part of it is like a lot of autistic individuals have sensory issues. So they may be sensitive to sounds, lights, movement, touch. They may crave movement or they may be repelled by movement. So their sensory system sometimes is not completely integrated. And so I don't know if that's actually the correct term. This falls under the umbrella of occupational therapy, the sensory integration dysfunction. And so they diagnose it, they decide, or they can help determine which areas are delayed or which are difficult, and then they come up with therapies, ways of doing therapy to help integrate that sensory system.
Okay. And so a lot of what you said in the definition, you kind of answered, I guess, a lot of my next question, which is okay, which is like, what are some of the common signs? And would you call it a symptom?
Yeah, I mean, it's called a symptom in the medical diagnosis.
Okay.
But the autism community and I tend to talk about it more as traits.
Yeah, that sounds to me,
Yeah.
especially if we're not going to look at it as a disorder, we're looking at it more as a difference.
Right.
It doesn't quite seem right to use the word symptom. You know what I mean? Right. And so traits. So what and you named some of them, which was like sensory, communicative, social. As a parent, if you're looking at your child, and I guess they start to do these tests at about what age? Is it 12?
Well,
18 months?
depends who you're talking to. A lot of times they'll say we don't know until 2. But I've seen kids get identified, year and a half.
Okay.
Some moms kind of know right away that there's something different.
Okay. And so for those moms that may know right away, or for those moms who just notice that there's something a little different, what are usually things in a child that young you would notice?
Well, I mean, sometimes they're really sensitive and cranky. Sometimes they don't develop the facial expression or the reciprocal smile. They may be sensitive again to certain sounds. They don't make eye contact. There's different sensitivities to being held and touched. They're not developing language. They may end up doing some repetitive movements. That was something else I kind of missed in your first question, was self-stimulatory behavior, which is something that helps them kind of organize their system, is to do repetitive movements, like, flapping your hand or rocking your body or making vocal sounds. So those kinds of things you could start to notice in your child. Yeah, and just kind of the social engagement can
Right.
can be off.
And so if you start to notice any of these things and you decide, I'm going to bring this up to my pediatrician, what would that conversation sound like? So, I'm assuming that you have to be a specific type of pediatrician to really, I think I can't remember exactly what it was called. Is it like a behavioral pediatrician or something like developmental behavioral? Look, your cat is
I know.
poking.
Yeah.
You want to get in the conversation. When you decide that you want to go and have that conversation with your doctor, I do feel like some people feel there's some shame to it, or there's some, embarrassment to it. But I would really say you should bring it up if you have these concerns. Your child is getting checked every couple of months. What are some of the things that you should discuss with your pediatrician if you start to notice some of these things?
Yeah, I think sometimes too, denial is an issue. Like, I
Mhm.
don't want anything to be
To
wrong
be
with
wrong.
my child. And a lot of times I'll hear, well, I was a late talker. My husband, someone in my family was a late talker and they're fine now, or things like that, that try to kind of minimize. And it may be true, but it's better safe to try to get a diagnosis than kind of put it off. And, if you go to your pediatrician, and not every doctor is really up on diagnosing autism, diagnosing it early. I've gotten a lot of parents that will tell me, I knew something was wrong, but my doctor said he's just going to grow out of it, just wait. And then lo and behold, they're autistic. So I think a lot of times, especially moms who, not to be sexist, but they tend to be the ones that bring their kids in and that notice, that have that they just kind of feel it, and they have this knowing that something's
That
not right.
something's off. Right.
I would
Okay.
just pursue it. I would get a second opinion. I would look up doctors or therapists that have that experience with autism.
And something I learned recently is that autism is in the genes. It's genetic. Now, is that always the case, or is it that it can start somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I've read that like there's a 90% genetic component. But I've also had families where they say, nobody else in the family has it, no relatives. However, autism can go undetected. And a lot of times what we see is when a child does get identified, start looking around the family, a lot of times that's how parents find out they're autistic.
Through the child.
Yeah. Yeah, because they'll say, oh, well, I do that, or I'm like that, or yeah, I have that too. And back in the day when autism was diagnosed, was more of the visually obvious kind of autism, where maybe their verbal skills were very poor and they did a lot of this stimming or had huge meltdowns and things like that, was the only diagnosis that that was made for autism. And now we understand this wide spectrum, and you can be I mean, nowadays so many adults are figuring out that they're autistic, and we could talk about that later. But yeah, it's, look around, if you have it in your family, look around.
Absolutely. And well, we're going to get to that part in just a little bit. So what types of doctors and therapists can actually diagnose autism?
Basically any type of doctor can. A pediatrician can, a
Mhm.
MD, a neurologist, a developmental pediatrician, a psychotherapist, a psychologist, anybody is able to diagnose, but it doesn't mean that you'll find someone who's knowledgeable enough to make that diagnosis. So you do have to do a little research.
So I know that oftentimes autism can be roped into other things, or it can be misdiagnosed for other things. Like I've often heard parents say, oh, he just has ADD. And once, some time passes and the proper diagnosis is given, it turns out that the child is autistic, and they could additionally have ADD or ADHD, but that's not always the case. Is that correct?
That is so correct. So many times I find kids, the kids that are more verbal, they first get a diagnosis of ADHD, and then later on they get diagnosed autistic. So that is super common. I'm trying to think if there's another for kids, if there's another. I think that's kind of the main one, or they just don't get diagnosed until later.
Later on. Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Asperger's earlier, which, I learned years ago was a form of autism. So I wanted to clarify and get from you exactly when you said that Asperger's is not used anymore. Are you saying that Asperger's is no longer a part of the autism spectrum, or are you saying that that term Asperger's is not used? It's referred to as something else?
Yeah, the term. So we have this diagnostic and statistical manual of diagnoses. And so I think it's every 5 years, there's a revision that comes out, or maybe it's longer. I'm not sure. But anyway, and so all these, doctors, psychologists, whatever, they get together and they decide, oh, well, back in the day, being gay was a disorder. So they took that out. Right. And so with Asperger's, they decided we're just going to call it autism spectrum and not have a separate diagnosis for Asperger's. So someone who would be diagnosed Asperger's is now currently diagnosed autistic.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that out.
Yeah.
That up, because I still hear the term.
Yeah,
often.
It's still used. And there's some people that are Asperger's and they want to keep calling themselves Asperger's. So, and some people find it really offensive because Asperger's was in Nazi Germany, who it was named after, so they don't want to use it also for that.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I mean, coming from that perspective, I would understand. So let's change directions real quick, because I do want to get back to some of these questions. But since you brought up things that are offensive, when you learn better, you do better. Right?
Right, absolutely.
So you and I had a conversation earlier today, and I wanted to clarify something that was brought to my attention because the research that I'd done had kind of left me unsure about specific things. So if you guys are wondering what I'm speaking of, if you see here our beautiful banner, this is not the original banner. I'm only going to show it briefly. I don't want to leave it up. But this was our, let me see if I have it. I think I might have taken it off altogether. Yes, I did. Okay. So my original banner had puzzle pieces across the top. And now you notice that it does have the multicolored infinity sign. It was brought to my attention that people in the, I don't know how to, I want to make sure autistic community. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
People that are autistic, they take offense to the puzzle piece. And so I had a conversation with her earlier today before we went live, because it's never Lady Fresh's intention to offend anyone. A lot of what I read said that it was more of a preference thing. It was used, and it's still to date used very heavily. If you are to Google the logo or symbol of autism or autism awareness, the first thing that you are going to see are puzzle pieces and the ribbon with puzzle pieces on it. So naturally, I actually thought it was really beautiful, but my perspective of what the puzzle piece meant obviously wasn't the same perspective of that of a person with autism. So can you clarify for me why it is offensive to those who are autistic?
Yeah, so that model of a puzzle piece says that autism is a puzzle and there's missing pieces of the puzzle. And once we figure out all the missing pieces, then we have like a cure or we figured it out. And autistic adults now are speaking out more and more and find that very insulting because they don't think of themselves as a puzzle. And I just got distracted by reading that. I got a knock.
Oh, yeah, ignore those.
um, so they feel, and I've learned a lot from autistic adults because I didn't know a lot of this myself either, being in more of that medical model, been raised or as a professional, been, learned in that regard. But it's a neurological difference. It's not a defect. And so being told that you're a mystery, you're a puzzle piece, there's something wrong with you that needs to be fixed can be very offensive. And the idea is that we accept people that have different kinds of brains, their brains process information differently. And if autistic people and other neurodiverse people are living in an environment that supports the way their brain works, it is not a disorder, but they're forced to live in a neurotypical world that's often overstimulating. Often there's so many things about it that can stress an autistic brain. And not to say that there are autistic people that are, I use the word impacted, and I'm not even sure if that's, politically correct, but that really can't function, that, have very severe kind of behavioral issues and things where they need like somebody with them all the time to keep them safe, to take care of their needs. And what the autism community prefers to say is that that's someone who needs more support versus somebody needing less support, or used to be, well, it's referred to a lot as higher functioning.
I wanted to actually get into that at some point
Yeah.
too and have you define that. But
Yeah.
just so people are aware, I learned this. So someone brought it to my attention the other day, but I had seen something before, and it said that both symbols were used, and so I incorporated them both. But something kept nagging at me about it. So when we tested the stream earlier and you and I had the discussion, I was like, okay, I'm just going to change it because after I got a lot of clarity from you. So for everyone who has been so wonderful about promoting my show, banners for my show, flyers for my show, everything up on Instagram, the banner has been changed. If you need a new one, please go ahead and send me a message on IG. I'll send you an updated one, but everything on my social media is being changed. I changed everything maybe about 30 minutes before the show to make sure, because I want to make sure that we are sensitive. And like I said, this is learning. This is learning for me. This is learning for my viewers. And I see a lot of people in the chat that have children on the spectrum, and we'll talk about that too, that are like, I had no idea. I didn't know. I wasn't aware. I came in putting up puzzle pieces thinking. And it's so funny because I really, and my sister can attest to this, when we were talking about doing this show, I said, I really like the puzzle piece. And I didn't look at it as they need to be fixed, because puzzle pieces aren't about necessarily fixing anything. It's, to me, I thought it represented so many different pieces or so many different things in the mind, and just trying to fit it together to make sense. And then once you fit it together, it's made whole. And so I looked at it completely different than from someone who lives it every day and may take offense to it. So just like I said before, Lady Fresh is not here to offend anyone. So everything has been changed. I'll be doing some additional banners, and that is a part of the reason why I wanted to do this show, is to educate and make sure that we're doing things and being more sensitive to things as simple as a symbol. I also heard that the preference is for it to be referred to as autism acceptance as opposed to awareness. They don't need awareness, they need acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, I'm continuing to learn so much on this journey. So I thank you for clarifying that as well.
Yeah, and I am not autistic myself. I do have traits, and I come from a neurodiverse family. So, I'm speaking for people that I've learned from, so I'm not firsthand. But as you were explaining how you saw the puzzle piece, I could see exactly what you're saying. But I thought, what if somebody referred to me like that? That they need to kind of piece together all of this stuff to make it whole. I mean, I'm not already whole, like I'm not already,
Not right. Right.
So I think there's probably subtle implications in that are kind of hurtful.
I get and I totally get it. Like after getting the explanation, because even before, when I was doing the research and I looked it up, I never found anywhere that gave it in layman's terms the way that you explained it. So that's why I was like, okay, well, it's accepted. I mean, I've seen autistic people use the puzzle piece. So I wasn't right. So I was just I'm like, okay, so it's obviously kind of one of those things that you may not like it, you might like it. It's a preference kind of thing. But if now that we know better, we're gonna do better. So It's all been changed. Okay, so let's go back to autism in children. I want to kind of shift towards, you got the diagnosis. Now, what are some of the things that parents can do to support that child?
Right. So if you're in the US, and I know it depends state by state, and I'm in California, when a child gets an autism diagnosis, it's a freaking whirlwind because the thought of the day, of course, is early intervention is best, and we go in kind of hard and heavy with all these services. So they often get speech therapy. They often get occupational therapy, which I was explaining is for kind of their sensory system. A lot of autistic kids will have, like they call it fine motor, like difficulty sometimes with doing smaller activities like using fasteners or utensils and things like that. And so occupational therapy covers that. And then ABA, which stands for Applied Behavior Analysis, which is this very scientific, evidence-based teaching procedure that's very intensive. So kids can get, when they're young, like 30, 40 hours a week of this intensive teaching. And it's also ABA's become very controversial. A lot of the autistic adults are talking about how ABA was traumatizing to them. And so I'll try to be brief but ABA came like in the 60s as this way to teach kids to follow directions, be compliant, do what you're told. And it didn't, and it was pretty harsh and pretty forceful. And it's evolved, it's gradually evolved. But the basic tenets of ABA are, people call it, some of the adults call it like conversion therapy. Like they're trying to train individuals to act not autistic. And I know that things are evolving, and I've seen some things out there called trauma-informed ABA and more, so I think there's more, the more the adults speak out, the more awareness there is about it. But it's still like the puzzle piece, it's still, the preferred main treatment. And I would just say to parents that, it can be helpful if it's done in a very supportive way, if it takes into account the child as an individual, what they like, what they don't like, if they don't want to do something. They used to pretty much coerce kids into doing these tasks. Well, don't do that anymore. Um, so, and it needs to, especially with the young kids, it needs to be really play-based and fun for them. And if they can't handle all those hours, don't provide all those hours. But kind of the idea is when the brain is young in those, I guess our main, what they say, their main personality is formed before the age of 5 or something. So the way the brain develops, that's why they say getting in early is really important to help with some of those deficits like communication and stuff. But we need to always remember that they're children first, they're individuals. They may be quirky to a neurotypical person, or they may have odd interests. Well, that's who they are, and let's embrace who they are. So.
And so, mentioning that, what are some things that you can actually do at home for your child? Because I do know, so, and I don't know if this has always been the case or if this is a newer thing because more children are being diagnosed, but there's situations where people are having their children diagnosed, they get the diagnosis, and then they have to wait long periods of time to get them into some type of therapy that's, one, have space, and two, is covered by whatever type of insurance that they may have. So waiting lists are long, and you have a diagnosis 1 month, and then it's 3 months before you can get in to actually start having that child receive the type of therapy that they need. What are some things that you think that parents can do with children at home?
Yeah. So it's a little bit hard because every child is so different. Like you might have a very verbal child, or you might have one that barely speaks, or, but I guess in general, let me think about that. I always like to teach parents to validate their child's feelings. So, because, well, for any child, it's really helpful. Like, I know you're really mad. You don't like that, but we still have to, come inside the house or something. Versus you need to do what I tell you because I said so, and do it right now, that kind of thing. So it's being really patient. Autistic kids a lot of times need transitioning is hard for their brains, especially to stop doing something that they like. So preparing them ahead of time when things are going to change. They like routine and I'm talking in general, right? Because everybody's a little different. Some kids are fine with transition, but in general, that's an issue. Change of routine can be really challenging. So we want to prepare a child ahead of time as much as possible that, we're going to need to leave the park in a little bit. So let's go on the slide 3 more times, now 2 more times, 1 more time on the slide, and then we got to go. Things like helps their brain to process pictures, visuals. A lot of times they learn better. So if you're talking to them, it doesn't always process well. But if, like, we're going to leave the park and show a picture of home or the car, or let them see the car, that helps them kind of process what's happening. Also narrating, talking. A lot of times when there's a nonverbal child, parents tell me a lot of times they just forget to talk to them because they're not getting that feedback. But you still need to really talk to your kids. These autistic kids, it is amazing because a lot of them have kind of limited communication. Their affect may be kind of flat, like they don't look like they're not making eye contact. They look like they might be in their own world playing with their toys. And some of them hear every single thing and they pick up on what's going on. And so just because they don't look attentive, doesn't mean that they're not. And so if you talk about what's going on, like, oh, let's put your shoes on. Here's your shoes, shoe, just kind of be verbal. You can make it fun and playful. A lot of them love music. So you can put song to things that are routine. Like if they don't like, brushing their teeth, they don't like some of those tedious tasks, or they have sensory problems, they don't like it because it doesn't feel right. If you make a little routine, a little song, a little game out of things,
that makes a lot of sense, because we do it already with things like, we're gonna go to the potty, or you're trying to get them to eat the vegetables, they dread, and so you use songs and you use language that actually kind of includes them in the decision making instead of a dictation.
Yeah,
that's kind of what it sounds like. Like, okay, we're leaving in 10 minutes, let's go. Or, didn't I tell you to? Because I grew up in a didn't I tell you because I said so era. That was the generation. It didn't matter if you had issue or not. You better do what your mama said, or there's gonna be consequences. Like, I'm finding that parenting as a whole is different now. You can't parent these kids today the way that you parented them in the 90s. I have to remind people that remain nameless. I have to remind people that, often that, things are so different, different nowadays.
It's true. I mean, a lot of this stuff is for every child, but especially for an autistic child. Yeah. The other thing, a lot of times they'll have food sensitivities. So never force eating, never make it a power struggle. You have to be really creative to try to get them to eat. Again, not all of them, but some of them are going to be very picky. They'll only eat certain textures. So I always look for anything that they eat that's like a liquidy texture. Like a lot of kids love pizza. So can you make a pizza and kind of puree something and mix it in the pizza sauce? Or smoothies, if they like fruit and things like that, well, they drink a smoothie and then you can sneak some healthier food in there. But some kids, their taste buds are so sensitive that even if you try to do that, they can tell. But I've heard parents tell me, well, the doctor said, oh, when they're hungry, they'll eat. Well, some of these kids won't, because, I'm going to hold out until you eat these vegetables. Well, then they're not going to eat.
They're not going to eat it.
Power struggle. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I know I'm a texture person. I'm a texture person. So like, if it don't look right, the like that. And I feel it's funny because these quirks and I kind of came as I got older. Like, it's like, okay, yeah, that doesn't look like. So I can only imagine in the brain of a child. It's like,
yeah.
So let's shift a little bit away from children.
Okay, I just want to add one more thing.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So their development a lot of times is delayed. And so like potty training can be delayed, language can be delayed. Doesn't mean that they'll never get there. So just for parents to realize that just because a lot of parents will worry, and no one can predict, because there are kids that don't develop that, but for the most part, it's just going to take them longer. So
no, that makes a lot of sense. And so I noticed that someone in the chat mentioned that, she suspected something going on with her son. And like you take your kids to the doctor a lot. Like their first 3 years, they're at the doctor a lot, and her pediatrician never, said anything. And it's odd because it's been a long time since I had a little baby, but it was like we would go to the pediatrician and they would ask you, are they eating this? Are they, trying to say this many words? And then after you're done, they'll tell you by, next milestone, they should be doing some of these things, so that by the time you come back, the dialogue, you're letting them know, okay, well, she's not quite liking the solids, the vegetables this way or that way, or she's not quite speaking yet. So for the pediatrician not necessarily give you the diagnosis, but even if that's not their area of expertise, to maybe refer you or tell you what steps you need to take. Like, That almost sounds criminal to me.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, that's kind of in general for all of us, right? When we go to the doctor, we have to really advocate for ourselves, and we might not, the doctor might say, especially to women, oh, it's just stress, and then you find
Oh
out, oh
yeah.
my gosh, I have,
Yes.
so I think,
That's yes.
so that's what I'm saying. I think for parents, especially moms, that trust your intuition. If you feel like something's not right, trust yourself. And all the way through, especially when you have a special needs kids, when you have special needs kids, professionals will tell you all kinds of things. And some are well-meaning, some of them are, think everything's the parent's fault, all kinds of stuff. So get support for yourself and trust your gut over what people are telling you.
So I wanted to talk briefly about autism in adults. Now, I'm assuming with there is a difference in the traits that you see in autism in a child and traits that you may see in autism in adults. What would typically be some things that would make an adult who has grown up, they may even live on their own, they may fall into that category of high functioning. What would make someone decide to say, I think I may be autistic, or think that something's going on?
Yes, absolutely. So, this idea of autism as a spectrum is throughout life. It's a lifelong diagnosis or difference. And so in adulthood, there are adults that are going to need a lot of support. They need to live in a home or they stay with their own parents, or they go into a board and care facility or some kind of facility because they're not able to care for themselves. And let's see, I'm going to lose my train of thought. I think that some people, autistic adults I've read and listened to them speak, feel like they have autism and something else, because autism is not, it's not an intellectual disability or anything. So if someone is not able to function at that level, and sometimes they're not able to function because they can't provide their own care because the autism impacts them so much. Like they can't initiate taking care of themselves, which is a huge challenge. So I know I feel like I'm feel a little confusing here, because there's a lot of controversy about the more impacted individuals that need that kind of support, and whether they're autistic or they're autistic and something else. Because we're understanding more and more about autism, that it is this spectrum. And I think with social media, a lot of autistic adults now are online and they talk to each other. And there's so much more autistic adults that are now advocates, because growing up undiagnosed, like I said, can be very traumatic, because it's almost like if we grew up in a foreign country, but everyone expected us to know the culture, know the language, know everything, and we just didn't. And so there's something wrong with me. Why can't I? And why am I always left out? And why don't I think like other people, So it becomes this whole sense of identity. They can have depression, anxiety, all these secondary issues. They often do get diagnosed with other things like bipolar disorder, borderline personality, all these different diagnoses, because people just didn't think that an adult who, I've had autistic women tell me, I went to get a diagnosis and they told me I could not be autistic because I make eye contact and I have friends. So that automatically means that you're not autistic. So there's just been a lot of misunderstanding about what it is. But a lot of people now, I think, find out from social media, or they suspect something and they read something and then they take an online test and they say, oh, look at that. I have all these traits and maybe I am autistic. And so they go down this kind of path of discovery. And I have found that people that self-identify as autistic are usually right. I think there's
Mm,
other diagnoses that can be more confusing, but I've not had anybody come to me and say, "I think I'm autistic," and I have a
they were
diagnosis
wrong.
session and they were wrong. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is something that you and I talked about quite a bit about autism in adults. And we discussed that just like with everything else, you got IQ tests and you got are you a genius test, all that kind of stuff online. And while listen, we are not telling you that online tests are the give all, be all, end all. Like that's not it. It can be used as a tool, as a start for you to maybe kind of test the waters and try to get some questions answered as to why you may be feeling a certain way. A big misconception about autism is like you have to look like it.
Mhm.
You know what
Correct.
I mean? You have to look like someone with autism. You have to
Right.
act like someone with autism, and that's a huge misconception. What are some other misconceptions that you believe people have about autism?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so big. I mean, I have so many people that have, so I do a support group for late identified autistic women. Um, and because, I think men have a lot in common, women tend to do more of this masking, because and not to offend any men, but women's brains are more socially focused. They just are, that we're built that way. We have these connectors in our brains. And so autistic women tend to want to make social connections, but they don't understand how, because their brains are wired differently and they don't get the neurotypical social world. So they do what they call masking, where they kind of study and figure out, oh, when somebody says this kind of comment, I'm supposed to smile and laugh and nod my head like this. I
Mm-hmm.
may not understand why I'm doing it, but they get very expert at this masking that they don't even realize they're doing it. They don't know where they start and the masking starts and all of that. So, and men do this too, for sure. And so when they tell somebody I'm autistic, oh, no, you're not. They just get that kind
Mm-hmm.
of comment, and it's really painful and insulting to them because, like, how do you know? Well, you don't look autistic. Um,
Right.
and professionals do the same thing, that not all professionals are educated in this area. And so I've had, it adds to a person's trauma to be told, I think I'm autistic. I just want to get an official diagnosis. Well, like I said, the eye contact thing is huge because I would say probably the majority of kids with autism or autistic kids don't like to make eye contact, but some do, and some are fine with it. And some people, through their masking, teach themselves how to make eye contact. But it's often sensory overwhelming. It can be painful, uncomfortable, the eye contact can. But that's, one of the things that we learn to diagnose autism is that they don't make eye contact. So, it's a group of symptoms and traits. It's not just one of those things. And so,
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't know, did I get off track or
No, you really
lost
did.
myself?
No, you
Okay.
really did. I mean,
Okay.
the idea was just to kind of give an idea of what an
Yeah.
autistic adult and thanks to Jen, we may be able to add a part 4 to this series, you guys, and be able to get the first-hand perspective. I did have someone lined up to do it. They weren't able to do it. Then I got a backup, and then they weren't able to do it. I wanted to make sure you guys got a perspective from an adult who lives this every day, who lives with autism and is fully functioning. So I want to make sure you guys get all the different facets of it. So thanks to Miss Jen stepping in at the last minute for me. We hopefully will be able to either add our guest to one of the remaining shows, or we will have a part 4. I'm super excited. Like, that makes me smile so much on the inside because I feel like that is the missing, can I say missing piece? See, I don't want to offend nobody, see, but I feel like that is what's missing from this. I
Yes.
really want to, I think it'll be full circle if we're able to do that. So thank you so much for reaching out to someone. I don't know why I didn't think to reach out to you first, because you have so many resources.
Oh, it's yeah. I mean, I have some amazing autistic friends and colleagues, and I really do want their voices to be heard because they have the firsthand experience,
So what I want to do, if it's okay with you, is go through the chat and see if I can get a couple questions.
Mhm.
Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
All right, let's see. I got to scroll back. I know I have some written down. He wrote down some for me, but I tried to stop the chat so that I'd be able to go back and actually catch them directly. So let's see. This one says, is there a process for affordable testing for historically marginalized populations?
Yeah. It's really difficult because, I mean, at least in California, and I think a lot of states in the US, the medical insurance or the government, like Medicare, Medi-Cal, that kind of stuff, is where you would go to get diagnosed. And like anything else, if you have resources and funds and insurance, you can go get a second opinion, you can pay out of pocket, you can find those professionals. If you don't have those resources, then, like I've talked to autistic adults that are not able to find a therapist that understands autism or someone to diagnose that knows, what they're looking for. And I think, yeah, with especially marginalized populations, yeah, it is really difficult.
Difficult. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is there late onset autism for adults?
No, autism is something that you're born with. It may not show up until later. Like with some children, it doesn't really show up until high school because that's where the social, it's more socially noticeable. Yeah, and then there's a lot of people like we're talking about that get diagnosed late, but there's not an onset of autism late. It'd be something else if it.
So in other words, you are born with those traits.
Yes.
Basically, if you're autistic, you are born with it.
There is a presentation of autism where a child develops pretty typically, and then around 1.5 to 2 years old, they start losing skills, which is, heartbreaking to parents. They can, regain most of the skills that they've lost, but they didn't show the traits of autism until then. And I don't know that they really understand how that happens or why that happens. There's a lot of controversy about causes and that kind of thing.
Okay. And how early can you detect signs of autism, and what's the best age to get your child checked?
As soon as you notice something that's not right, I just wouldn't wait. Like you're talking about at your regular doctor's appointments. But I've had parents tell me that they could tell right away, like the baby didn't cry at all. And that was kind of a little red flag that there wasn't that going on. But it is hard to really diagnose it that early, but those are some early signs.
Okay. And Miss Callie, our guest for our next episode, is saying, my son was diagnosed last month. He's almost 4. All the program waiting lists are like a year long.
Oh.
I can honestly say I feel defeated. What do I do?
Oh, that's awful. Yeah, I found here in California, after COVID, things started going back and there's, a lot longer waits and stuff. And I think there's staff shortages and all of that. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I would research as much as you can. Like we were talking earlier about some strategies to use. You can reach out to me and see if I can help you too. Um, but yeah, it's really hard. But I think talking to other people, getting support, talking to other parents, um, because for some kids, although early intervention is great, for some kids it's overwhelming, and so it needs to go slower. So it's not always the best thing to bring in all these professionals and hours and that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Miss Callie, I hope that helps. This one is, what are some coping suggestions for undiagnosed young adults?
Yeah, good question. So depends on it depends on what the issues are. The idea is, and one of the reasons to get diagnosed or self-identified is to figure out what your needs are, what your individual needs are, because if you don't, the world can be a really stressful place. And there's something called autism burnout where you can just be depleted and be like unable to really function well, um, because like your sensory system can get overloaded. And so I know what a lot of autistic people do, is they will limit, they know their, what their limits are. So they'll maybe once a week they'll go out to dinner, but if they went every night, that would be like um, too much going on for their systems. They have a lot of autistic adults talk about the spoon theory. I don't know if you've heard of that, but the idea that you have so many spoons in a day, and each thing that you do that takes a spoon away, you have limited capacity. So if you enjoy socializing, but it does kind of deplete you, and that takes away a spoon. And then you go to work, and that's like 3 spoons in a day. You have to kind of limit how much effort you put into, or how much you participate in certain things that drain you. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely.
Okay.
It
Okay.
does, absolutely. So this one's not a question, just someone speaking out to Miss Callie. It says, please hang in there. My son didn't get the services he needed until he was 10 years old. Once you find the right school for him, life will get so much better.
Oh, that's lovely.
And so this is what this is all about is, I want to be able to not only get you to be able to explain a lot of this stuff, but for people to be able to communicate with one another. I have people following each other now on IG, offering each other, offering each other support. That's what it's all about. And that's what I like to see. So I'm scrolling through because I froze the comments so that I could be able to scroll through and
Well,
try to get to the
just
question.
want to kind of tap onto that last comment too, is in the school, if he's almost school age, make sure they understand his diagnosis, and that he gets a program that's going to meet his needs. And schools do have a lot of services. They usually have speech and OT and everything too. So.
Okay. We getting these resources, y'all, getting all this advice. Y'all better be writing this stuff down. So Elizabeth Rose, which is going to be our art therapist on episode number 3.
Whoa.
Any tips on how a school bus driver can deal with an autistic child who becomes abusive, spits, and screams on the bus?
Yes, you need to advocate with the school to provide an aid, to figure out what's going on the bus. Why is this child acting that way on the bus? It's like being a detective to figure out the reasons for certain behavior. So is it only on the bus? Is it everywhere else? Is there the noise on the bus? Perhaps if he wears headphones, he'll be okay. But it's really advocating to understand what's going on. I've seen here in California where some kids have gotten now they have Uber, but they would have taxis because a child couldn't handle the bus. And if you think of all the different issues that could impact a child on the bus. This driver's a stranger and you don't sit in the same place all the time. And maybe there's a kid that's making noise, or maybe the movement makes them uncomfortable. Their sensory system can't handle the movement. So, yeah.
I can see how that would be an issue, because it seems like riding the bus for some children with autism would be overwhelming. Because now you have so many kids on the bus. The bus driver don't be playing most of the time. They're like, yo, get back there, sit down. So it's more of a dictation.
Yeah.
As they're not going to take the time with that child
Right.
Do you feel, before I go into the next question, because we're going to be wrapping things up here, do you feel that the schools, and this, if you don't have the answer for this, it's totally fine. It's just that her question triggered a question in me about, whether or not the schools and people that work for the schools, crossing guards, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, not so much the teachers, but, all these supporting faculty. Do you think that there is enough training for dealing with children and not just with autism, just any type of neurodiverse conditions?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I mean, I'm sure there's some schools that do way better than others. But yeah, I don't know how much that's taken into account.
Yeah, because I mean, when you think about it, the bus driver is your first point of contact and your last point of contact for the day. So that can set the tone for a lot. And I know I never really rode the bus myself, but I've seen where like the bus drivers have to get up and break kids up from fighting and all kind of different things. So I can only imagine about, that being overwhelming. So I'm just curious, how much our educational system, especially if your only option is to attend public school, or, you can't necessarily be put into a special school or a private school or something that has a little bit more in-depth training for that. Like, how much our public schools are really putting resources into aiding our neurodiverse children.
Right.
It seems like something that should really be high on the list of priorities, but unfortunately, it just isn't.
I mean, I've seen both. I've seen some amazing programs. And a lot of times the kids that they have like special needs will be on a separate bus, like a smaller bus. And the driver, I don't know if they're trained, but they're aware that these kids have different needs and stuff. And so I imagine if the child's that aggressive, he's probably on
something separate,
special bus, but still they may need to have an adult there with them, or that's just not going to be a good option for this child to go on the bus.
So I have another question from Kiwi. Salute to you, Kiwi. She's another up and coming content creator. So you guys go over there and subscribe. Can limb stiffness be a sign? And I was wondering about if there are any physical traits. I know tippy toe walking can be one of them. And my daughter walked on her tippy toes till she's every now and again still try. We tell her you're gonna break your toes doing that. But are there physical signs to look out for, like for instance, limb stiffness?
Yeah, so I've not heard of that one. I know that there are what they call comorbidities, which mean other issues or traits or disorders that go along with that are more common for autistic individuals. For example, I don't remember the name of it, but there's one where the joints, move in ways that they're not really supposed to. That's a common one that I've seen. Motor skills, motor coordination, like clumsiness, stuff like that. People can develop like the autoimmune fibromyalgia, that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I haven't heard of the limb stiffness one myself, but I'm not a medical person either. So
I get you, but that was a really good question, Kiwi. Thank you for that. So Elizabeth Rose chimed back in and said the bus has an aide, and he sits in the same seat and has sensory toys. He doesn't act up until the bus parks or stops.
Okay, well, that gives you a lot of information, right, about Is it stop at school or at home? Does the child not want to get off the bus? Yeah, so it takes, like I said, kind of figuring out and then maybe preparing the child ahead of time for what's going to happen and maybe have something that he looks forward to when he gets off the bus. So maybe he doesn't have to go in class right away, but he can go to the playground and go on the swings for a little bit. The kind of thing isn't like, why should he get special privileges, but it can help his sensory system. It can help him transition. What does he need in order to be able to go there? And I tell parents sometimes, if kids hate going to school, pay attention to that. Because sometimes they'll have a good year and then the next year they start hating going to school and they don't want to get out of bed or something. So all
Oh,
of that,
wow.
yeah. Because when you think of the school day, there's so many things that can create stress for an autistic child, and one thing can throw them off. They can be very sensitive. So a new kid in the class maybe is, for some reason, is making that child uncomfortable. So.
All right. And now, last question. We're going to have to stop here at the questions, you guys, but make sure you tune in for part 2, where we can get some more questions answered from the parents' perspective. What are the 5 major types of autism? And that's actually a question I did have that we didn't get to was, were there categories, stages, levels to autism?
Yeah, so I'm not sure about the 5 major types. I'm trying to think of what that could be. But as far as the official diagnosis, so this is the medical model, there are 3 levels of autism. Level 1 is needing minimal kinds of care and support. Level 2 is kind of a moderate amount. And then level 3 is needing, I'm not sure if it says total care, but a lot of care and support. So yeah, I'm not sure of the major, there's Asperger's, like we talked about, that's no longer used as a type of autism. But yeah, I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, when I was doing my research, I didn't find there. I think there was something that did have 5 types of something, but I don't know if it was necessarily types
Yeah.
of autism. Let's see what they're saying. The conscious community says, I can answer that question. No, there's not. Oh, this is about the training.
Okay.
So notice not enough training. Also, folks who decide to work with children should have a level of patience. I agree. And
Yes.
understanding of the diversity of the student population.
Absolutely.
I totally agree. And I think that, children with, neurodiverse condition, like that's adding to the population. You know what I mean? That's just adding to the population as far as needing to understand, the totality of the types of children that you're dealing with. And so I totally 100% agree with that.
Absolutely.
And so but did you have something to say about that?
I was just going to say, even within the classroom, to accommodate diverse learners and not make them like they have to sit in their seat with their hands folded on their desk and they have to only speak when spoken to. Some of these kids can't sit still. Some of these kids need to have movement. They have different levels of understanding. I mean, it's just that traditional 30 kids in a classroom all doing the same thing is just, I forget if there's at least 40%, I think, of kids are diverse learners or something, some huge amount. Yeah.
Okay. And before we let you go, I wanted you to let the people know where we can find you.
Let the people know.
Let the people know. I am going to put it up on the screen as well so that they can see your resources. You know what? Tell us about Autism 360 support.
Okay. So I started Autism 360 support because I was seeing a lot of the programs and things for autistic people, didn't take into account their emotional development. it's more, act this way, act neurotypical. So I wanted to create this site that prioritized our emotional needs, our mental health, and all of that. And so what's happened is I still am available to help parents and families and all of that. I started to focus a little bit on the late identified population because I was seeing so much of it on social media. I kind of, during the pandemic is when I kind of got more online, and I was seeing especially women, there's no resources for adults at all. And so I started a support group that I have, I've run several of them already for the late diagnosed or identified, we call it. They don't have to be diagnosed. But that's been just amazing to people that can meet other people that have been through the same thing and have the same kind of brains, and they've always felt so isolated. So, but I also do diagnosing, and I do a diagnostic interview. So it's a painless, easy, low stress kind of diagnosis versus some of them that I hear are like $3,000 for 3 days worth of diagnosing and all of this like overwhelming stuff. So if you're outside of California, I can't give you an official medical diagnosis, but I can definitely tell you whether you would meet the criteria. It's just about state laws, and they regulate licensing and stuff. And I will be starting a membership site for that population, for the late identified women. That's hasn't started yet, but so you can go to my website. I'm on Instagram. I have a LinkedIn page. I'm not hugely active on social media, but I'm there. And so yeah, and if you have any questions following this, just shoot me a question, and I'd be happy to answer you or support you in any way.
Rock bottle on the track, boy.
Yeah. Lady fresh, keep it real, and that's a fact. She gon' tell it like it is, that's just that on that. Yeah. That's just that on that. This the fresh perspective with Lady Fresh. Lady Fresh, keep it real, and that's a fact. She gon' tell it like it is, that's just that on that. Yeah. That's just that on that. Tune in every week, rockin' with Lady